how have you found the transition into the energy sector? I imagine it's an absolutely crazy time to sort of come into it. Obviously, you've got the rising cost, and then obviously everything that's going on in Russia, Ukraine, and the conflict there, which has drastically impacted that industry. So how have you found that?
Yeah, I think the business context one is interesting, isn't it? And I think it's one that comes up quite a lot in information security. How much of the job is industry specific versus like the similarities across sectors? And
yeah,
I have moved quite a bit across sectors in that I started out in kind of the military / kind of national security space, and then financial services, and then latterly retail, helping to defend Kanye West's Yeezy trainers. I didn't even know what a Yeezy was before I joined them, but there we go.
That's a really important job at the minute with everything that's going on in that news.
but I think the interesting thing was that you kind of have there's this perception around maturity between sectors of, in terms of cybersecurity, and the level to which regulation drives the importance of cybersecurity on the board agenda versus risk and versus kind of all the other asset and customer trust and all that sort of stuff. And I think it is interesting being in a retail energy company, because it is a retail company, in that you're trying to increase or protect that trust that you've got with customers. But there is that crossover with a heavily regulated sector in energy, and so kind of both doing the right thing and earning a business license is kind of, there's a really interesting overlap. So that was kind of the first challenge has been around what are the drivers? Is the driver really around trust and driving up, either customer or investor or shareholder trust, or is it around reducing risk and demonstrating competence from a regulatory perspective? So that was kind of the first thing to get my head around, is where do those drivers sit? And then secondly, like you say, the sector just nothing there's nothing I could have done, I think, to predict it, but the sector just is in a really worrying place. And it's as a company, we always talk about making decisions like the customer is in the room with us, and customers are going through a really hard time, and there's some very sad and harrowing calls that we're all kind of paying attention to, because that's kind of what drives our business. So that's part of the challenge. And then finally, you've got the terrible situation in Ukraine, which has caused a kind of a worsening cybersecurity environment, and has put us all at kind of a heightened state of threat, as kind of the NCSC is talking about. So a lot of things going on. A lot of things going on.
Sort of first year in what is it, technically a new sector, sort of. I mean, I did spend a bit of time in oil and gas, national oil companies, in a previous role, so I have an idea of energy as a whole, but specifically first time in retail energy, and interesting learning curve. But I think, I mean, it's difficult to characterize, but the vast majority of the skills required and the discipline is consistent with any other company that takes security seriously. It's that small bit there's some small specific things, around smart metering and some of the specific architectures that are used. That means that there's some technical things to get your head around, but broadly there's a tremendous amount of overlap with other
I was going to
regulated
say,
sectors.
does it transition nicely? Obviously, it's a similar role across different sectors. Is there that basic knowledge there that you can just then easily take over, implement into that business, think about, you know, be aware of that anyway when you're going forward with it? Or is it like a completely new challenge that you have to rethink everything you've thought you knew in order to apply it to that sector?
I think for me, my experience anyway, is that each company is as different to each other as sectors are different. So I've actually found that going to different companies and understanding the specific context of that business, you know, what's the culture, how do people operate, what are the ways of working, what are the key drivers for security as part of the business strategy. That's as different for every company.
Yeah.
That I've had experience in, and tends to drive it more than a sector. That's my experience anyway.
Yeah, and we're obviously focusing on everything that's going wrong. But if you were to sort of think about what you hope comes out of change, hopefully, within the industry, within the sector, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'll get back to, one of the things that I truly love about working at OVO is everybody treats their job as part of a much bigger mission. And you know, and that's kind of quite refreshing as a security person. You know, we're often worried about people not taking enough care or being as thorough as they could be with you know, sensitive data or personal data or critical systems or whatever it is, because they're just trying to get the job done. I'm working in a company now where people are worried about and people are concerned about their impact on the environment and genuinely making the world a better place and driving zero carbon. So it's almost kind of, it's in the DNA of the company to worry about something that's bigger than yourself and bigger kind of than your deadline. And so doing the right thing is so deeply embedded. It makes that it's a hook that we can talk about security and talk about the similarities between sustainability and how playing your part in something much bigger is really important. So that's been something that I hadn't really thought about before I joined, and it's been a really kind of positive thing about working here. And I think overall there's obviously positives around the security messaging that's coming through because of the Ukraine crisis, and the messaging that NCSC is putting out means that we just have more opportunities to talk about the importance of getting the basics right, about having defense in depth behind kind of critical assets, all of those kind of, we just have more opportunities to kind of communicate our message. It does mean that we need to be a little bit more mindful that we can potentially, you know, we could be boring. So we do need to kind of keep it fresh and make sure that everything that we're saying comes back to the business goals and comes back to what we're trying to achieve as an organization. But I think that's a positive as well, is just having that opportunity to kind of engage with all of the teams across the business.
And you talk about kind of the bigger picture and having a mission larger than the company or the revenue and what you're actually out to achieve. Do you think that is just the way the world is moving now, or do you think that is just the change from kind of where you are in the sector you were in to where you are now? Do you think it's something that is bigger,
I think it is. It does feel like a much bigger movement. And I can remember and I'm trying to, I can't remember who said it, but there was I think it was the CEO of Salesforce at one of the Dreamforce events in 2018 or 2019, and they talked about the trust revolution and talked about how everybody had greater expectations around their customer experiences, how they'd be more intelligent, and there was this really crucial component of trust. And if you look at all the surveys, kind of trust has never been lower. You know, trust in large organizations, trust in governments, and that sort of thing. So it does feel like it's becoming much more of a differentiator. And being proactive about that trust and not waiting for something bad to happen so that you have to then regain trust.
Yeah,
does feel like it's a movement that's much bigger than than just the current situation, for sure.
Yeah. And I noticed sort of on LinkedIn that you speak a lot about kind of like raising the standard of professionalism in the industry. So what does that actually mean to you?
I think there's a few things. I think it's recognition that we're quite a long way from where we should be and should want to be, you know, on a whole range of aspects. We're not diverse enough. We've got a bit of a monoculture, and that's, I mean, first and foremost, that's just wrong. And it's not the right thing to do. But secondly, it's less fun. Tends to be a less diverse and less inclusive environment. Tend to be less fun, in my experience. And then lastly, and unfortunately the message that does tend to get pushed is its productivity and effectiveness. You know, diverse security teams are more effective security teams. So there's all sorts of reasons that we need to improve that. We're also and kind of diverse across a whole range of measures as well. You know, age, and yeah, the whole range of it. So I think that's kind of a key thing. That's a key aspect for from a professional standpoint, is recognizing the importance of developing that. And then from a skills perspective, it still feels quite personal journey driven, if you see what I mean. So depending on whether you were a pen tester, or you're a network security engineer, or you started out consultancy and GRC, your starting point seems to define the kind of security person that you're going to be.
Right.
And that can also kind of lead to, it feels like it can lead to kind of biases and excluding certain ways of thinking about security. Whereas if we get the professionalism right, the professional standards right, we can then start to drive, you know, more equal importance across all of the disciplines that make up InfoSec, and particularly, you know, the conversation around technical versus non-technical comes up all the time, and it just doesn't. I hate that discussion, because there's specialist skills and there's general skills that make you a more effective professional, and those are the kind of discussions it would be better if we moved on to those, rather than you know, how many CVEs you've got.
Well, what do you think the solution to that is? Because it's obviously something that Adeptus come across a lot, and that's a big struggle for us, and something that we are trying to implement solutions. But it's such a difficult one, because it's like you're trying to change an industry that's worked like that for years and is set in its ways in terms of like technical, non-technical. What do you think the solution is to have that like transferability, if that's the word?
I think, I mean, obvious answer, there's no one solution. But the professions, there's a whole bunch of professions that have been on this journey. You know, there's the medical profession is kind of a good one to look at. Engineering, there's a whole raft of professions that have worked out different solutions, and some of it's come about through regulations. Some have come through kind of standards.
more, and some others have been more kind of a bottom up. You know, profession wants to professionalize themselves. So I think there's kind of external drivers and internal ones. I know the UK government put out a consultation on exactly that question quite recently, around professionalisation. You know, I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Information Security. They're doing some great stuff to kind of drive the professionalisation agenda and start to standardise a little bit on, well, what are the skills, what are the information skills and information security, what does the framework look like,
Right.
what are the typical roles, all of that kind of stuff. So there's kind of pockets of really good work, but joining all of that together is really hard. And I think if you leave it to just external factors like a government or a regulator to do it, then and there's a whole load of stuff that we can just do ourselves, kind of self improvement. I mean, I started out as a mechanical engineer, actually. So I got I'm a chartered mechanical engineer. That was my my beginning. So I've been through all of that kind of continued professional development right out of university. So I've got my own biases, and you know, there's a whole load of differences between information security and mechanical engineering, and reasons why some of the things that engineers do may be good for the profession, but there's some other things that might start to exclude and act against the kind of diversity and inclusion agenda, because you start putting up barriers and gates to people entering the profession, which is the last thing we want to do. So it's a tough question. You've got to think about it. We've got to think about it kind of as a whole.
But I guess it makes more sense for the people in industry that have that knowledge, that experience, rather than somebody that's looking in from the outside trying to implement change. I guess that's just always more difficult. But we talk about change. We've spoken about change of the industry, the sector, quite a lot. But I want to kind of focus on who has inspired change in your life. So this sort of video series that I do is all about extraordinary people inspiring change. So I want to know, who is that one extraordinary person, or multiple, that has inspired change throughout your life, your career? And any change.
It's a long list, actually. It's a really long list, but I think number one spot probably goes to my partner, because as soon as the OVO opportunity came up, she was like, "You got to do it." It's you know, the potential to kind of contribute to a really fantastic mission, and so she was the one who kind of got me really kind of focusing on that as an opportunity. And then kind of in the background all along has been my dad's influence. He was an engineer, and so exactly right. As hard as I fought against it, I ended up and he worked all over the world. You know, built the skyline in Hong Kong, and we spent time in the Middle East and that sort of stuff, and it really inspired a kind of a sense of adventure, I think. I mean, I've worked in quite a few countries myself now, and that kind of challenge that comes from working in different cultures and understanding how organizations work, and how people work together, and the kind of the different perspectives that everyone brings. He really inspired that in me. So quite a
physical lesson, I suppose, like physically seeing something actually be built through teamwork and a professional environment and hard work. So I had a lot of that. You know, I was doing systems engineering and trying to work out
you know, kind of in a military context, how threats and kind of defenses all play together in kind of a big systems engineering view. And my dad would, we did that years ago, working out how heating, ventilation, air conditioning, electrical, mechanical, all the fire systems work together. And you know, he claims it was all done 40 years ago. He's probably right, but
no, he could be CISO.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you do you wish that you were still in a military sector at the minute with everything that's going on in terms of just being on the inside of that, or are you glad that you don't have to deal with that?
I was quite happy to move out of kind of governmental stuff and into commercial. And you know, one of my reasons to move and move out of financial services into you know, retail, as it was, was the idea that I might be able to have a bigger impact in a sector which was still trying to work out what cybersecurity really meant, and where the value drivers were, rather than a sector where security is kind of front and center and a very obvious part of, you know, you put your money in a bank because you know, because it will be safe, or you know,
people like, just someone walking on the street will always be aware of, like, are they gonna get, you know, hacked online, or will their bank be sort of you know, stolen? But no one thinks about all the smart appliances that are in their house or anything like that. So yeah, you are right, it was completely.
And I think it's that opportunity to really potentially have a bigger impact on an organization's strategy was what attracted me to retail. And now I've come back to a regulated sector, so yeah.